I was standing in the office bathroom, staring at the blood on my underwear, when I knew. This wasn't just spotting. This was something much worse. My hands shook as I grabbed my phone, already searching for my OB's number. That's when my boss's text came through. "Presentation starts in 15. Where are you?" I closed my eyes, one hand on my cramping abdomen. "James, I need to leave. I think I'm having a miscarriage." His response took exactly 27 seconds. "The Henderson account is worth $4.7 million. We'll get you to a doctor after." Everyone loses something for success. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood there watching 3 little dots appear and disappear as he typed another message. "Pull yourself together. The conference room is already full." As I walked back to my desk, legs shaking, documents clutched to my chest, my colleague Mark glanced up. "You okay? You look pale." Before I could answer, James rounded the corner, Armani suit perfectly pressed, not a silver hair out of place. "There you are. Henderson's people are waiting." His eyes flicked down to my hand, still pressed against my stomach, then back to my face. No sympathy, just impatience. "Time is money, Sarah, and they have plenty to spend. Let's go." I straightened. My blazer swallowed the metallic taste of fear and followed him down the hallway. With each step, I felt something precious slipping away. Updated. Holy crap. I didn't expect this post to blow up overnight. Thank you all for the supportive comments. To those asking if I'm okay now, physically, yes. Emotionally, that's complicated. Several of you have asked if I sued James. Let me continue the story and you'll see what happened instead. Would you have walked out right then, regardless of consequences? You need to understand something about Harrington and Associates. It wasn't just a law firm. It was the firm in Chicago for corporate litigation. The kind of place with mahogany-paneled walls and crystal decanters that were actually used, not just for show. The kind of place where first-year associates slept under their desks during big cases and wore it like a badge of honor. I'd been there for 9 years, clawing my way up from associate to junior partner, the first and only female partner in the firm's 47-year history. I'd postponed everything for this career. Friendships, dating, doctor's appointments, my mother's 60th birthday. When I finally made partner at 32, James had clinked his Macallan 25 against mine and said, "Welcome to the big leagues. Now the real work begins." And it did. My billable hours target jumped from impossible to inhuman. Vacations became mythical creatures I'd heard about but never encountered. I worked every weekend for 14 months straight, but I was proud. I'd made it in a man's world without compromising who I was. At least, that's what I told myself. Then I met Daniel at a charity gala I'd been forced to attend for networking. He was kind, thoughtful, and somehow found my 80-hour work weeks impressive rather than off-putting. 6 months into dating, when I got food poisoning and he showed up at my apartment with Gatorade, saltines, and a gentle insistence on taking care of me, I realized I loved him. When I turned 34, we started trying for a baby. I kept it quiet at work. Pregnant women at Harrington seemed to disappear like Soviet dissidents. But after our second IVF round succeeded, I finally told James, making sure to emphasize my dedication to the firm. "Congratulations," he'd said, in the same tone he used for "pass the salt." Then, without missing a beat, "I'm putting you on the Henderson account. They need someone meticulous." The implication was clear. Prove you're still valuable. The Henderson account was massive, a pharmaceutical company facing multiple class action suits. I threw myself into it, working 16-hour days despite the morning sickness that had me vomiting in elegant bathroom stalls between meetings. I'd been so careful, taking prenatal vitamins, avoiding caffeine, downloading pregnancy apps that told me my baby was now the size of a blueberry, then a strawberry, then a lime. The morning of the presentation, I'd felt off. A dull ache in my back, a heaviness in my pelvis. "Just stress," I told myself, popping a Tylenol and heading to the office at 5:30 a.m. to prepare. By 10 a.m., the cramps had started. By 11, I had spotted blood. And by 11:42, standing in that bathroom stall, I knew with certainty I was losing my baby. But James had made his priorities clear. And in that moment of shock and pain, I made a choice I would replay in my mind for months afterward. I put the firm first, just as I'd been conditioned to do for nearly a decade. Mark caught my eye as I entered the conference room, my presentation, materials clutched against my navy blazer. His brow furrowed slightly. We'd worked together for years, and he could tell something was wrong. But he said nothing as I took my place at the table, setting up my laptop with trembling hands. 12 people sat around the gleaming conference table, Henderson's CEO, their legal team, our senior partners. James stood at the head, already schmoozing. "Ah, and here's Sarah, our expert on pharmaceutical regulation. She's the best we have, practically lives and breathes legal code." I smiled mechanically, tasting copper in my mouth. Was it from biting my cheek, or something worse happening inside me? I couldn't tell anymore. As I began the presentation, I felt a warm trickle down my thigh. Thank God for black skirts, I thought, distantly, as if observing someone else's nightmare. I made it through all 76 slides, answered 19 questions, and even managed to laugh at the CEO's terrible joke about lawyers. No one noticed how I stayed seated throughout, how I pressed my hand against my abdomen between speaking points, how the color had drained from my face, or if they did, they chose not to see. When the clients finally left, promising to sign the GASI contract by end of week, James clapped me on the shoulder. Knew you could handle it. That's why you're partner material. Then he checked his Patek Philippe watch, a Christmas gift from his wife, he'd once mentioned proudly. I've got a dinner. Email me the follow-up strategy tonight. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. As he strode away, I remained frozen in my chair, unable to process what had just happened, what was still happening to my body. That's when his wife, Eleanor, walked in. Eleanor Harrington wasn't what you'd expect from a senior partner's wife. No country club headbands or tennis skirts for her. She'd been a human rights attorney before marrying James, with her Yale law degree and reputation for taking on corporations that dumped toxic waste in vulnerable communities. She'd stepped back from practicing when their kids were born, but still sat on several nonprofit boards. Sarah, James asked me to drop off these tickets for the charity gala next month, she said, then stopped abruptly. My God, are you all right? You're white as paper. I tried to stand, to reassure her I was fine, but the room tilted sideways. Eleanor caught me as my knees buckled. I need to call an ambulance, she said, already reaching for her phone. No, I whispered. Please, just help me to the bathroom. In the pristine marble bathroom, the truth came out, both figuratively and literally, as I hunched over in a stall, Eleanor holding my hair back as I vomited from pain. I'm losing my baby, I finally admitted, tears streaking my makeup. I told James hours ago, but the presentation was too important. Eleanor's expression shifted from concern to something harder, colder. James knew? He knew you were having a miscarriage and made you stay? When I nodded, she helped me clean up in silence, then drove me to the ER herself. In the sterile hospital room, as doctors confirmed what I already knew, there was no heartbeat. Eleanor held my hand. She didn't offer empty platitudes or awkward sympathy. She just stayed, a quiet, steady presence as my world collapsed. I'll handle James, she said, when they finally discharged me at 2 a.m. with pamphlets on grief and physical recovery. You take care of yourself now. What handling James meant became clear the next morning. I'd emailed HR that I needed a few days off for a medical emergency. By 7:30 a.m., my phone exploded with notifications. An all-staff email from James announcing I'd be taking a 2-week paid leave for personal health reasons, and that Mark would temporarily handle my cases. Then came a text from Eleanor. Take the time, we'll talk when you're ready. I spent 3 days in a grief fog, alternating between sleeping 14 hours and staring blankly at my ceiling. Daniel was a godsend, handling everything from picking up my medication to fielding concerned calls from my mother. On day 4, I finally showered, put on real clothes, and called Eleanor. Come to the house, she said. James is in New York until tomorrow. The Harrington home was exactly what you'd expect from a top attorney. A Lincoln Park mansion with tasteful art and gleaming hardwood. Eleanor led me to a sunroom at the back, overlooking a garden that probably required its own dedicated staff. I've been doing some research, she said, placing a leather portfolio on the table between us. Did you know Harrington has lost 6 female attorneys in the past 3 years? All high performers who suddenly needed to focus on family or wanted a better work-life balance. I blinked, surprised by this opening. I knew about Claire and Rebecca, but 6? Eleanor nodded grimly. 3 were pregnant or had recently given birth. 1 had a cancer scare. 2 had parents with serious health issues. She tapped the portfolio. What happened to you isn't isolated, Sarah. It's pattern and practice. She opened the portfolio, revealing printed emails, spreadsheets, and what looked like interview notes. I've been talking to them. They all have stories, accommodations denied, subtle demotions, being pushed out after health issues or family needs arose. I stared at her, realization dawning. You've been building a case. I needed confirmation, something recent and documented. Her eyes met mine. What James did to you wasn't just immoral. It likely violated several employment laws. My legal mind kicked in automatically. It would be hard to prove. I didn't explicitly say I needed to leave, and I ultimately stayed voluntarily. You texted him you were having a miscarriage. He told you to stay anyway. That's documented. She reached across and squeezed my hand. But this isn't about a lawsuit, Sarah. It's about something bigger. For the next hour, Eleanor laid out her plan, a complete restructuring of Harrington and Associates, starting with its toxic work culture. The catch? She needed someone on the inside, someone with partner status and the documentation to force change. Why are you doing this? I finally asked. You've been married to James for 30 years. Eleanor's smile was sad but determined. I've enabled his behavior for far too long, made excuses for missed family dinners and the way he treated colleagues. I convinced myself it was just how business works. She shook her head. Watching what he did to you, what he's done to so many women, I can't be complicit anymore. As I left Eleanor's house that day, plan in hand, I felt something shift inside me. The grief remained, a hollow ache beneath my ribs, but alongside it grew something new. Purpose. For the next 3 months, I became the perfect employee. I returned from leave with appropriate gratitude for the firm's generosity. I worked the same punishing hours, smiled at the same tasteless jokes, attended the same client dinners. But now I was documenting everything, every inappropriate comment about female attorneys' appearances, every accommodation denied, every assignment given with impossible deadlines that forced parents to miss soccer games and dance recitals. I wore specially adapted glasses with tiny recording devices to partner meetings, perfectly legal in Illinois, where only one party needs to consent to a recording. Meanwhile, Eleanor worked the social circuit, having quiet conversations with the spouses of major clients. Did you know how they treat their female attorneys? So disappointing in this day and age. The real coup came when James handed me the Bridgewater case, a female CEO facing gender discrimination. The irony was apparently lost on him. What wasn't lost on me was the opportunity to connect with a powerful woman who understood firsthand what discrimination looked like. I don't normally mix business with personal matters, Catherine Bridgewater told me during our 4th preparation session, but I've heard concerning things about Harrington's treatment of female employees. This was my opening. Would you like to hear my story? I asked. By the time I finished telling her what had happened 6 months earlier, Catherine was incandescent with rage. This ends now, she said. What do you need from me? Updated. Thanks for all your comments and support. I see many of you asking what exactly I was documenting and how Eleanor helped behind the scenes. Let me clarify. Everything was done legally, with one-party consent recordings and carefully preserved written communication. Many suggested I should have just sued, but when you're fighting institutional power, sometimes you need a different approach. Have you ever had to choose between immediate revenge and long-term justice? The annual partners' retreat at Lake Geneva was where Harrington traditionally announced promotions, profit distributions, and major firm decisions. It was also where, exactly 1 year after my miscarriage, I chose to detonate the bomb I'd spent months assembling. James kicked off the morning session with his usual self-congratulatory speech about record profits and prestigious new clients. I sat quietly, noting how the 7 male partners nodded along, while I, still the only female partner, reviewed my notes one final time. Before we move to compensation discussions, I believe Sarah has an announcement about the Bridgewater case, James said, nodding in my direction with the confidence of a man who thinks he knows exactly what's coming. I stood, smoothing my Alexander McQueen suit, a gift from Catherine Bridgewater after we'd won her case. Thank you, James. I do have an announcement, though not just about Bridgewater. Something in my tone must have signaled this wasn't the standard case update. James's smile faltered slightly. This past year has been transformative, I began. As you know, I suffered a miscarriage during the Henderson presentation. What you may not know is that I informed James of my medical emergency, and he explicitly instructed me to continue working. The room went deadly silent. 6 partners shifted uncomfortably in their leather chairs. Only Mark looked genuinely shocked. While recovering, I had time to reflect on our firm culture. I discovered I wasn't alone in my experience. I opened my laptop, projecting a slide onto the wall. Testimonials from former female attorneys, their names redacted, but their stories painfully similar. Over the past year, I've documented 147 instances of gender-based discrimination, accommodation denials, and hostile work environment issues. Another slide appeared, a timeline with dates, incidents, and names. I've also gathered evidence of billing irregularities, including clients being charged for hours never worked. James stood abruptly. This is absurd and completely inappropriate for— I'm not finished, I interrupted, my voice calm but firm. I've shared this documentation with the management committee at Bridgewater Industries, Peterson Healthcare, and Weston Media. I let that sink in. I just named our 3 largest clients, representing nearly 40% of the firm's annual revenue. All 3 have expressed serious concerns about continuing their relationship with Harrington under current leadership. I closed my laptop. Which brings me to my announcement. I'm resigning from Harrington and Associates, effective immediately. You can't, James sputtered, but I held up my hand. I've accepted a position as general counsel at Bridgewater, where I'll be implementing a comprehensive ethics program. I've also had conversations with several Harrington attorneys who've expressed interest in joining a new venture I'm establishing, Crawford Legal Advocates. I hadn't used my maiden name professionally in years, but it felt right for this new beginning. This isn't a negotiation or a threat. It's simply information you need as you make decisions about the firm's future. I gathered my belongings. Oh, and you should expect calls from Peterson and Weston this afternoon. They've requested meetings to discuss their concerns. As I walked toward the door, Mark stood. I'd like to hear more about this new venture, he said quietly. My office, Monday at 9, I replied, not breaking stride. James's voice caught me at the threshold, strained but dangerous. You'll never work in this town again. I'll make sure of it. I turned, meeting his gaze directly. Check your phone, James. As if on cue, his cell phone buzzed. He glanced down, face draining of color as he read the text. From Eleanor, I knew, telling him she'd moved out and taken half their assets, including her family shares in the firm, which constituted a controlling interest. Everyone loses something. For success, I said, echoing his words from a year ago. Some losses are just more deserved than others. The aftermath was both more dramatic and more subdued than I'd expected. James didn't show up at the office for 2 weeks after the retreat. When he returned, it was to a radically different landscape. 4 associates and 2 partners had resigned to join my new firm, taking significant client relationships with them. Peterson Healthcare had terminated their relationship with Harrington entirely. Weston had placed them on probation, demanding a comprehensive audit of their billing practices and workplace policies. Bridgewater had simply withdrawn all their business without explanation. Eleanor filed for divorce 3 weeks after the retreat, citing irreconcilable differences. The legal community buzzed with rumors, but the truth was both simpler and more complex than the gossip suggested. She hadn't left him just because of what happened to me. She'd left because my situation had forced her to confront decades of compromise and complicity. My new firm, Crawford Legal Advocates, opened with 8 attorneys and a clear mission: to provide exceptional legal representation while maintaining ethical practices and humane working conditions. We instituted flexible scheduling, remote work options, generous family leave, and transparent compensation. Our billing model emphasized value over hours, quality over quantity. Catherine Bridgewater became our first client and our most vocal advocate. I don't just believe in their legal expertise, she told American Lawyer magazine 6 months after our launch. I believe in their vision of what a modern law firm can be. As for James, the partners forced him into early retirement 9 months after my departure. The official announcement cited personal reasons, but the industry knew the truth. He'd lost too many clients, too many talented attorneys, and eventually, the confidence of his remaining partners. The most unexpected consequence came during a charity event where I bumped into Mark, who'd ultimately decided to stay at Harrington to change things from within. You know what's ironic? He said, swirling his whiskey. James always worried about women taking maternity leave and not coming back. Turns out he should have worried more about how he treated the ones who stayed. 3 years passed in what felt like both a heartbeat and a lifetime. Crawford Legal Advocates grew from 8 attorneys to 27, with offices in Chicago and Milwaukee. We'd established a reputation not just for legal excellence, but for genuine innovation in an industry resistant to change. I kept the ultrasound picture in my desk drawer, a grainy image of potential that never materialized. Not as a reminder of loss, but of redirection. Sometimes I'd look at it before difficult meetings, a private acknowledgement that some endings create unexpected beginnings. My personal life transformed as dramatically as my professional one. Daniel and I married in a small ceremony at the Chicago Botanic Gardens, surrounded by wildflowers and people who truly cared about us. When we decided to explore adoption, the universe delivered in its own way. Teenage twins whose mother was a former client, facing terminal cancer and desperate to secure her children's future. Lisa and Jason were 15 when they came to live with us, guarded, grieving, and suspicious of promises from adults. Building trust took time and patience, but watching them gradually unfold like reluctant flowers brought a different kind of parenthood than I'd imagined. Jason's quiet intensity reminded me of myself. Lisa's fierce protectiveness of her brother showed a strength that both broke and healed my heart. Last month, while helping Lisa with college applications, I found myself sharing the story of my miscarriage and what followed, not the sanitized version I'd told at legal panels, but the raw truth of pain and purpose. So that's why you created the Crawford Foundation? She asked, referencing the nonprofit we'd established to support workplace equity and family-friendly policies in professional settings. Part of it, I acknowledged, but also because change doesn't happen through individual victories. It happens through systemic transformation. She considered this with the serious thoughtfulness of a teenager grappling with adult complexity. "Do you ever see him? Your old boss?" The question made me smile. "Occasionally, at industry events. He retired to Florida, but still consults sometimes." What I didn't tell her was about our last meaningful encounter, at a bar association dinner a year after my departure. James had approached me during cocktail hour, older and somehow smaller than I remembered. "I underestimated you," he'd said. "Not quite an apology." "You underestimated a lot of things," I'd replied. He'd nodded slowly. "Eleanor and I are talking again. She said I should thank you." A pause. Apparently, I'm a better grandfather than I was a father or husband. I'd simply raised my glass in acknowledgement and moved on. Some conversations don't need closure because the story has already written itself to completion. What mattered more was the conversation I'd had with Eleanor last week, over lunch at her favorite French bistro. Now serving as chairwoman of the Crawford Foundation, she'd shown me pictures of her grandchildren, proudly pointing out milestones and achievements. "You know," she'd said, setting down her cappuccino, "I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I'd spoken up sooner. How many careers might have been different? How many lives?" "We can't rewrite the past," I told her, "but we're certainly rewriting the future." And we were. Our foundation had already helped 7 law firms implement comprehensive policy changes. 3 major corporations had revised their parental leave and accommodation practices based on our model. Publications from Harvard Business Review to Forbes had featured our work as a case study in ethical transformation. The pain of that day, the physical agony, the humiliation, the profound grief, would never fully disappear. Some losses leave permanent marks. But as I watched Lisa bend over her essay about resilience, I understood something I couldn't have grasped while standing in that bathroom stall 3 years ago. Sometimes the most powerful legacy comes from what we build after we break updated. Wow, I'm overwhelmed by all your responses. So many of you have shared similar workplace experiences, which confirms what we already knew. This isn't rare, it's just rarely discussed openly. The Crawford Foundation now has a website where you can find resources or share your story if you choose. The most meaningful change often starts with one person saying, "This happened to me." Have you ever had a moment where your greatest pain eventually led to your greatest purpose?